Formula One's 2026 cars are being made slower to fix their biggest problems, and now we have some fascinating new data that shows exactly how this is going to work and what the actual trade-off is going to be. Discussions between F1 stakeholders took place over the course of April and ended up with an agreed set of changes, all complementary, to address the big problem of the qualifying spectacle and experience for the drivers, but also safety matters as well. You can watch the video that we made off the back of that being agreed for more information. But what we're going to do now is dig into those consequences and explain a bit more how it actually works, because as is the way with the 2026 rules, things can get very dense when you're getting into the detail. That task has been made a lot easier thanks to some fascinating simulation work done by McLaren and shared by the team as well, where they have basically compared a 2025 car against a 2026 car and then the 2026 car based on the regulations that will be in place for Miami. So that's going to be our focus point here. Don't want to get too bogged down in the details of what's changed. What you just need to understand for the purpose of this video are the key aspects to it, and that is, number one, reducing the amount that the battery can be charged over the course of a qualifying lap from 8 megajoules to 7 megajoules. 2, increasing the amount of super clipping that can be done from 250 kilowatts to 350 kilowatts, and that's when you run the MGUK in reverse to charge the battery, so you run it against the engine and charge the battery that way. And the third element, and this applies more in racing situations, is a limit to how much of the MGUK you can use, how much boost you can use in certain parts of the circuit at certain times. So McLaren, led by its technical director for engineering, Mark Temple, has put together this fascinating illustration of a 2025 F1 car versus the 2026 car as it was in Australia, and then an Australia lap based on the 2026 rules that will be applied from Miami. You've got the blue line is F1 2025, the orange line is F1 2026 at the start of the season, the green line is F1 2026 from Miami onwards. Now, obviously, the first thing, the most striking thing about this graph is it does show the big difference between the 25 and 26 generation of cars, and that's where you have these moments where there's way more straight line speed at the end of all of these straights. So these speed traces are literally just the car speed itself through the course of the lap at Melbourne. So, for example, you have the start, you have the run to turn 1 here, then turn 1 and 2 themselves, run up to turn 3, so on and so forth. And you can see across the lap the broad trend of the blue line, the 2025 car, reaching being much faster at the end of the straights, even though, as you can see here in the middle of the Albert Park lap, the 2026 generation of car can be much faster, or can be faster on the straights, because it does have all of that electric power available, but it's just available for such a short amount of time. If you look at the 2026 V1 lap here, you see a sharp decline. It's much slower into turn 1 for starters, but then a bigger decline, and then of course this fascinating but strange and unpopular phenomenon of a big speed decline as you go further down the straight. Now, that is where they're deploying various extreme energy management or battery charging tactics, lift and coast, but especially the super clipping, the running the MGUK in reverse. So the drivers are still on full throttle at this point, but the speed is reducing massively. And you see that at various points across the lap, not just the biggest, longest straights, although that's where it tends to be most evident. What McLaren has done, though, by doing this, obviously this graph does illustrate that very nicely, and that's the problem that's going to be solved by the changes, the green line. What F1 intends to do, by reducing the amount that can be charged over the course of the lap, that means you deploy less as well. That's where the fact that the lap will be slightly slower overall comes in. But because you can only charge the battery so much, there's only so much silliness that you'll be inclined to go down, because there's no benefit from doing it if you're not charging the battery. And that results in subtle but fairly significant changes over the course of the lap. It's a more normal lap, as we will see here. The first thing is into the first corner at Albert Park in Melbourne. You have the 2026 V2 with these changes is able to deploy slightly longer to the braking point of the corner itself. Yes, it's slightly slower on the straight, but the key part is when you get to the corner, you get to the point where the driver's braking and really having to slow down, it's actually going faster. So you see here, you're trading off that little bit of extra deployment, that little bit of top speed for the fact that you can run for longer. And yes, it's still much slower than 2025, but it's following that sort of more normal trace. It's just a slower version of it. And that trend carries on through the majority of the lap. So the run up to turn 3 and then through 4 and 5 is fairly normal with V2 versus V1. But then you start to get into those moments where previously the lap was a lot more sensitive to these energy management demands. So for example, turn 6 in Australia, there was a lot of lift and coast or super clipping here, and the speed would deteriorate massively going into the corner, even though this could well be a part of the lap where drivers are basically still flat out. And as you can see again, with these changes for Miami onwards, you would see a more normal speed curve. So they wouldn't have to do that extreme charging, that extreme tactic into there, and it's all a little bit more normal. Now, coming to the trouble spot in Australia, much like that place that was the case for 130R at Suzuka, the run to turn 9 and 10 in Melbourne completely neutered the high-speed chicane in the middle of the lap, and you can see why. This was the orange trace there for 2026 V1. Peaks really nicely, but very early, and that's not the kind of trace that you want to see. It's certainly not conventional, and it's a gradual decline all the way to the corner. So while the minimum speed of the cars in 9 and 10 wasn't drastically different to 2025, the way that it's approached is so much more gradual. It removes the challenge of the corner, and it's also very underwhelming to watch and to experience. Now, that doesn't go away completely with 2026 V2. It would be silly and it would be inaccurate to pretend otherwise. But it is a little bit less extreme. So yes, there's a decline over the course of it, but you get to a point where it actually tapers off a little bit more. So it's sort of the decline stagnates. It's worse than 2025, of course, but there's actually a crossover point once again where with the V2 changes, the 2026 car's actually going faster than it would have been at the start of the season when we were in Australia for real. And again, that has the benefit in terms of a challenge and a spectacle. It means the cars are approaching the corner slightly faster. It also means it's just not that prolonged, a droning decline in speed and revs and everything. This trend continues over the course of the lap. More deployment for longer on the run to turn 11. Actually, the car's still accelerating as it gets to and the speed's increasing still as it gets to the penultimate corner, the last real braking point on the lap, which is very different to kind of how the speed trace is. It goes in completely the opposite direction, basically, to how the cars were for real in Australia this year. And then coming out the final corner, you see more of the trade-off, right? So V1, the cars for real in Australia, shooting off the final corner and on the run to the line really quick, faster even than 2025, but it tapers off sooner. The deployment is there or thereabouts off the corner, but then out through the final corner and over the start-finish line, the 2026 V2 car will be slower. It has less energy to play with. But overall, it's a more normal trace. What you'll also hopefully see is the cars moving around a lot more. One thing that I really like about the 2026 cars is with less downforce, with the way that they're designed, slightly smaller, slightly lighter. And we'll hopefully see a bit more of that come to the fore with these V2 changes, because if I look at some of the speed traces again, so sort of turn 1 being a good example, again into sort of turns 9 and 10, but even turn 11, when you have the entry speed being, yes, relative to 2025, still a good chunk lower, but happening in the same way, that speed trace coming off in the same way, because the drop in speed is being determined by the drivers jumping on the brakes, that reduced entry speed versus 2025 is offset slightly by the fact that these cars have less grip. They've got less downforce. So the challenge in the corner isn't actually dissimilar. It's still more challenging because you had more grip to deal with that higher speed a year ago. The other thing that McLaren's data has shown us is how other elements of the energy management rules, particularly in races, could play out from Miami onwards. F1's absolutely adamant that the way that racing has changed in 2026, more of this yo-yo racing, more overtakes, even though there's disagreement over how authentic it is actually a good direction to have gone in. So they actually want to consolidate that. They don't want that to change too much at all. So there's no direct stuff aimed at influencing racing and overtaking, but there are indirect things, knock-on effects of the changes that have been implemented The energy, the battery charging limit doesn't change for the race compared to before, but the extra aggressive but shorter super clip will be possible in races too. There's also a new boost limit, as I mentioned at the start of this video. All of these things do have an impact on how the teams are going to be going out their races, how the drivers will be charging the battery, and therefore what energy they'll have available when, what electric power they'll have available when around the lap to race one another. Again, we get to Miami, we'll see this in reality, but McLaren's given us a bit of an example of how a change with the new boost limit could impact things. What we're looking at here are more speed traces. All three of them this time relate to 2026. The orange line, there is a black baseline 2026 lap in here, which you'll see in parts, but it's often dominated by the others. So you have in orange, you have the original 2026 regulations using the boost using maximum MGUK power at the start of the lap through those sweeps in the opening sector. In green, you see that strategy as well, but with the Miami onwards rules. This means that you get you have less boost to play with in certain areas of the track. This is defined by whether or not something is a straight mode or not a straight mode. So straight mode is when you have the active aero in low downforce mode, and when you're not in straight mode, you're just in normal higher downforce mode. The idea is that if you're in a place where straight mode is active, you're probably going to be on a straight or something close to a straight. This is where overtaking is safer, more predictable. So bigger speed variances are allowed. One of the objectives of the rules was to try and create new overtaking opportunities with different energy deployment in different places. That's kind of being rowed back on now for safety. For safety reasons. So Miami, the first sector, that's not going to be a straight mode zone, so you're not going to be able to use the full 350 kilowatts of power now. So based on how it was before, where you could have had maximum power, you see with the orange trace, the speed would have been higher through this part of the lap. Now, if you try and deploy the boost in the same place, you get less of a payoff than before because you've got 150 kilowatts to work with, for example, instead of 350 kilowatts. Maybe you'll have more. Depends on exactly how much boost you're already using when you press the button. Very complicated. We're not going to dwell too much on that here. What McLaren's emphasizing here is what kind of trade-off you could get if you pick your moments and deploy the boost in a different place, because now there's different power levels that you're going to get. So, for example, if you don't deploy the boost through the first sequence of corners because you're going to save your energy for later in the lap, you have this much flatter line here. So big reduction in straight line speed or speed through these sweeps than you'd have if you were using the lower boost limit and, of course, the original boost limit from the first few races where it was absolutely maximum. Rest of the lap's fairly normal. But then you get to the end where you've got this really long straight before the final proper corner in Miami. If you've saved your energy there so you can have maximum 350 kilowatts of deployment here, look at the massive speed benefit that you're going to get down into that part of the lap, not just versus the rules as they are going to be for Miami and you use the boost somewhere else, but also just relative to the first three races, the original 2026 rules, you're going to be much faster there. So look, this might be something where all the drivers and all the teams work out the same thing and they all try to do the same thing, but it's an example of how it's going to shift around the lap. And ultimately, if you do end up, for whatever reason, needing to deploy at different parts of the lap, that trade-off is still going to be there. So the idea is that we're now going to have more normal qualifying, more of a chance for drivers to push flat out in qualifying, but we're still going to have a more kind of organised, strategised version of the yo-yo racing we've seen in the first few races at different times. Let's wait and see how it works in reality, but it's just interesting to have seen some simulated examples of how this could actually play out. And if this works as intended and as these simulations suggest, it should at least be a step in the right direction.